Now we have three speakers after the lunch break, and we are going to be finished by 3:30. So our first presenter is Ken Diehm, the CEO of the City of Greater Geraldton, and this is another case study in participatory budgeting. Ken's had a very wide variety of experiences in his background, in both the public and private sectors, like our last couple of speakers, and he has discovered a passion for engaging the community in council decision making. As a result, the Geraldton Council has won 3 awards from the International Association of Public Participation for their efforts in participatory budgeting, and Ken will take you through the journey and describe the outcomes. Could you please welcome Ken Diehm?
Thank you very much, John. I was asked to come along today and talk about the City of Greater Geraldton's journey into participatory budgeting, but what I really wanted to do was talk about my journey into participatory budgeting. I've been in local government for nearly 30 years now, and I've always considered myself to be a bit of a hard-nosed local government professional. For me, I get excited about strategic asset management frameworks, long-term financial planning, infrastructure planning, roads, rates and rubbish, and community engagement was something that I really didn't have a great deal of interest in, and it was something that didn't excite me at all. So that was me when I had hair. I started in local government in 1986, and I did commerce degree at night, and I started as a filing clerk in the town clerk's department. That's back in the days before emails, when people actually wrote letters, and you had to write them up in books and file them in a strong room. And held a number of financial management positions, and ultimately became the CEO of a water board in far north Queensland. And I ended up coming back into local government in 2009 as the director of at Townsville City Council, which is a fairly large council in North Queensland. And I was responsible for running the commercialised businesses of the council. That's the water business, the sewage business, and the garbage business. And completed an MBA, and I'm finalising my second Masters on Conflict and Dispute Resolution, but I can never win an argument with my wife. So because of the nature of my work being about accounting, infrastructure, engineering, and in Queensland, party politics dominates local council, certainly dominated politics at Townsville. So I worked in a very political environment, and there was a strong political party dominance in the council that I work for, and some very, very strong mayors. So I had the Perry Mason approach to engagement, and that's to never ask a question you don't know the answer to. And I think in my conscience, I also had the P.T. Barnum approach, which is don't underestimate the stupidity of the general public. And that's where I was for most of my career. I had a bit of a life-changing moment a few years ago. My kids left home. I have 6 kids and they all left home, so that was great. I had my first long holiday that didn't coincide with school holidays. I went had 5 weeks holiday, and I drove up, my wife and I drove to Uluru, Katherine, over to Broome, and on the way back I was completely relaxed and had some time to reflect about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I said to her, I really don't want to go back and work at Townsville City Council. And I feel like I've spent nearly 30 years in local government, done all this study, and I really want to make a difference in the community that I work in. And I want to make a difference and get connected to a community. And I want to go of being captain coach. I mean, I don't want to be. I felt like I was playing in the A grade team. I was on the run-on team. But I thought after all these years, I want to have a crack at being captain coach. And she rather foolishly said, well, why don't you apply for another job? So I looked around and I came across the City of Greater Geraldton. It's in the Midwest. It's the largest local government outside metropolitan Perth and the urban sprawl in Western Australia. It had gone through 2 amalgamations with neighbouring shires, had strong growth, had a very diverse economy. No one industry represented more than 16% of the GDP. It was progressive council. They immediately, the budget before I arrived, they'd increased rates by 27%. And when I first read it, I thought, that's a typo, it's 2.7, and I kept on reading, no, it was 27%. And they projected rate increases of 7.6 per annum for the next 10 years. It was operating at a loss of around about $8 million, and I thought, well, that's a challenge. I'd enjoy that. And I felt there were some real opportunities to make a difference. One of the things that did interest me in my research was one of the programs I came across when I was preparing for my interview. And it was this 2029 and Beyond project. And it was a deliberative democracy project. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. Because I'd never heard of deliberative democracy. And I did a bit of research. It went over a couple of years. It engaged 3,000 people directly in our community over a couple of years. Significant number of hours, and has partnered with Curtin Uni to produce it. Had community forums, world cafes, conversation cafes, all those things that terminologies that were new to me. And it won a couple of international awards. It won the 2011 Reinhard Mohn finalist and the 2012 United Nations Livable Cities Award for Community Engagement. I thought, wow. And I knew that that was an area in my professional development where I could learn from. And I thought, that's a gap in my tool bag as a management, and I need to know more about that. So I think, apart from all the other challenges, this will be a challenge to get involved in this community stuff. So before I arrived, all the staff were celebrating the success of the international awards and all the programs that they'd undertaken, and then I rocked up. And one of the first things I wanted to know, I wanted to know what the future, what the council planned for the future. So being counter by original profession, I said, can you show me the 10-year financial plan? And can you show me the 10-year capital works program and the renewals program? And they said, well, we don't have that. So why don't you have? Well, we haven't got to that. There's this new integrated planning framework that's come in WA, and we get working towards that. But we don't have that. I said, what do you have? Well, we've got this great 2029 and beyond strategy, which sets the vision for where we want to be. We've got this great strategic community plan, and we've got plans on strategies on bikeways, vibrancy, economic development, tourism, digital futures, and they've all been done in consultation with the community. Every one of our plans has been done in consultation with the community. I said, well, what does that mean in terms of future costs? And if I stacked up all the plans if I stacked up the plans, they'd sit about that high. And I have read them now, after a couple of years. And I said, well, can you go through that and tell me what are the expectations of the community from this consultation process? And what are the commitments, or more importantly, what does the community feel are the commitments that we've given them as a result of this engagement? And they came back and said, well, after a month or so, they said, we've got about $500 million worth of capital projects that have been identified in these plans. Wow. Now, we don't have a big budget, the City of Greater Geraldton. Our renewals budget to renew our infrastructure is about $13 million a year. And our discretionary cash to fund new capital projects is only around $7 million a year. So I had a community that had an expectation to deliver 70 years worth of projects in the next few years. So that was a big issue. So I gave my staff a bit of a challenge. I said, I want to prioritise the capital works list. We can't deliver $500 million of capital works when we've only got $70 million to spend in the next 10 years. And I want to have a look at our review of range and level of services. And I want to do it in the next 6 months. I mean, every new CEO comes in and wants to get on top of it, got top of work pretty quickly, and I was no different. And that was the reaction of my staff. So they went away and they did a remarkable job, and they came back with the program which we called #ChangesCGG. And it was an internal program and an external program. The internal program was to improve organisational efficiency by focusing on culture and behaviour, business process and strategic intent. And the external program was about engaging with the community to develop a priority works, 10-year capital works priority listing and a range of level of services. And it was to be done through participatory budgeting processes. And that was my reaction. So I don't know if I'm ready for this. I was a little bit more colourful with my language. But I said to the guys, well, why participatory budgeting? And they said, Ken, well, the council's actually made a commitment to deliberative democracy, and bear in mind, it's a word I didn't know much about. And because we've engaged with the community so much, they now have an expectation that they're going to be involved in the council decision-making process. And my community services people, bless them, said they had a genuine belief that true wisdom comes from the combined knowledge of community and technical experts. And I took their word at that time, and now I firmly believe that that is the case. My staff told me that if we're going to do participatory budgeting, we need to have a couple of key elements. And the first one is that the community has to be involved in the allocation of resources. So the community has to have a decision-making process in terms of the allocation of our resources, whether it be the range and level of services or whether it be our 10-year capital works plan. The community need to decide the criteria to assess what we do. So rather than, for me, I would have given them the pillars from our strategic community plan and say, here's your criteria, use those. And my staff said, you can't do that. That's not how you do deliberative democracy. You've got to give the community the option to determine how they're going to value the works and services that we do. There has to be inclusion, so we need to make sure that the panels that we have or the engagement process that we follow includes everybody in the community, people with disabilities, gender, males and females, rich people, poor people. It's got to be truly representative of our community. Everyone has to have an opportunity to be included. And it has to be based on the principles of deliberative democracy. And as I understand it, deliberative democracy, or how I think about deliberative democracy, is really taking matters to the community, debating them with them, engaging with them, allowing them to review, ask questions, analyse, and giving them the tools to make recommendations on the matters that they're considering. Said, okay, that's great, we'll give that a go. So then I had to go and tell the council. The council loved all the other stuff, the strategic intent, the culture, behaviour, and we had some councillors that had gone through the 2029 process. They thought it was fantastic. We had a few new councillors. We came up with a governance structure, and at the top, the council would make the ultimate decision. We had an independent review committee. They were our process police, and we established some community panels. One community panel for our capital works priority and another community panel for our range and level of services. The difficult thing at that time was to convince the council that this was a good thing, because what I got from a lot of councillors, well, if you're going to ask the community and give the community a say in what our capital works priorities are or our range and level of services, isn't that our job? Isn't that what we're here for? And the way we attacked that, we said, well, your job is to act in the best interest of the community, make informed decisions that are in the best interest of the community. And what better way to do that than to actually engage with the community and ask the community? And we're not talking about surveys, because surveys are just top-of-mind responses to a number of questions. It's about real deliberation. So to their credit, they said, yep, we're going to back this, let's do it. And they made a really ballsy call, I thought. We recommended it, but we didn't know if they'd accept it. The council resolved that they would seriously consider the recommendations that come from the panels, and they went one step further, and they said, and we will implement them. So whatever you decide, we will implement. So this isn't a Progress Association budget. We've given community 100,000. This is our whole budget. This is our capital works budget. This is our operational budget. And they said, we will implement them. But if we can't, we'll try and understand what the intent was of the recommendation, and we'll see if we can work around that. And that was a significant call, and it got a lot of confidence. We received a lot of confidence from our participants that the council was real, because we went in there up front and said, whatever you decide, however you decide it, you could flip a coin. However you decide, the council says it's going to implement it. And it gave the whole process a lot of credibility. We had a governance review committee. They were our process police, and the name we gave them was Independent Review Committee, and they had a number of jobs. So they had to make sure that the panels were appropriately established, particularly with respect to eligibility, stratification, age, all those sorts of things. They needed to make sure that the process was accountable and transparent and free from bias. So we didn't want to have a situation where we have some strong directors and managers in my organisation, that we didn't want to have a situation where council staff were creating a bias or pushing community panels to make a certain decision because it suited their needs. They had to review all the material that was provided to the community panel for accuracy and relevance, and they had to champion the process within the community, and at the end they had to certify the extent to which the process was transparent, accountable and free from bias. So independent review committee, there's another important thing as well. Importantly, they weren't involved in deliberations. They were the ombudsman, the police, the process police, and so they couldn't amend any of the work. So their job was really, really important to the success of this process. A member of the independent review committee would attend every one of our panel meetings, and at the end of the day, they would chuck all the staff and myself out of the meeting, and they would do a review of the process with the community panel members to make sure that we weren't we were covering the issues, we're giving people an opportunity to speak and to be heard, that we weren't showing bias, and that the information we're providing was relevant and accurate. They also had, I'll talk about some of the other tasks a little bit later. So putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, we had to select panels, so we hired a demographer to come up with 2 panels, and again, it had to represent the demographics of our city, so that we had that inclusion. We had to do a lot of internal data gathering, and that was an enormous job. So we had to provide to the Capital Works community panel a list of all of our capital works that have been captured from all of those consultation processes, a description of what the works entailed and why they might be important, and an indicative budget. Now, we were looking at 70 years worth of capital works, so we did a bit of a cull first. We gave the community panel the whole lot, but we said we think this is the top 200, and knock yourself out because that's 20 years. We only want 10 years. And with the panel that was looking at the range and level of services, we had to break down our whole budget into activities and outcomes. Again, provide descriptions, provide that to them in hard copy format. We had established the independent review committee, and it was really important that those members were credible and respected in the community and carried some authority. We had to have the right technology to use because we couldn't just make it a paper-based system. And we teamed up with Curtin Uni, and technology was a major part of the process. When our community panels met, we usually had a table facilitator at a table, and might be 6 or 7 people at a table, with a facilitator, a computer that was hooked up to a network, and in the back office, we'd have people around there looking at themes and questions, and what we were going to put in the parking lot, and what needed to be discussed. And the technology really enabled us at the end of every day that we met with the panels to produce a report of the day's outcomes. And often when you work with councils and you have meetings and you have outcomes, you have to wait 2 weeks and then you'll get sent something. So we were able to give them every day a report, a written report on what had been discussed, what the agreements were, and the outcomes from that day's meeting through the use of technology. And we also need to keep the broader community informed, because there was a perception from a couple of people that this panel was given greater access to the council than what the general public have. And why wasn't I asked to be involved? So we had to make sure that we kept the broader community on the train with us through the journey. So our Capital Works panel, they met for 4 weeks in November. They reviewed 116 capital works projects. They developed values-based criteria, so they come up with their own criteria to assess the importance of a capital works project. I thought thought they might have chosen the strategic community plan, but they chose something completely different. And we had to allow them to determine their own criteria. They delivered a report with prioritised list based on the criteria. They made some recommendations for future processes, and we didn't want to go back. We said to them, look, we don't want to go back every year because new projects come up. We don't want to go through this every year because it's really intensive. And they said, well, what we'll do is we'll come up with a set of criteria that you can apply next year and the year after, and perhaps maybe in 4 years' time we do the exercise again. So they gave us some assessment of criteria that we actually use now and when we develop our capital works priority listing, because new projects come up from time to time. And we give that to council as part of our budget process. And the interesting thing for me, I mean, I was packing it. I was really concerned about what the results would be. And I can remember my executive team meeting, sitting there after the final workshop on capital works, looking at the capital works priority listing and thinking, wow, this is really good. We didn't change it. We didn't see a need to change it. It was sound, it was reasonable, it was logical, it made sense. So we recommended it to council, and the council adopted it. So but I'm quite proud that our community has decided what capital works we're going to be doing over the next 10 years. The range and level of services panel was much more involved. That was 8 weeks. That was a big job. We had presentations every week. Our panel would meet for a whole day on Saturday. We paid our community panel members, by the way, we paid them $100. If there were single parents, we organised babysitting for them. If people had transport problems, we organised transport. If people had disabilities, we made sure we had carers that could look after them. So every week for 8 weeks, these guys came in, and our staff all our managers came, and they presented. Everyone presented on their department, their activities, their costs, questions and answers, and that took a couple of weeks to get through that. And the rest of I think it was about 5 weeks, was basically reviewing, analysing, discussing, debating what we do and why we do it. They also thought it was important that they get some advice from the broader community. So they held their own workshop with the wider community. And we didn't run it at all. They ran it, and they got up on stage and they spoke about what they're considering and why they're considering it, and the issues that they're debating and the issues that they're concerned about. And they end up coming up with some criteria different to the capital works panel on how to assess what we do and why we do it. And they developed a preferential ordering of service level recommendations. And again, to my surprise, and remember I came from a mindset, never ask a question you don't know the answer to, never underestimate the stupidity of the general public, I was shocked that this was really good stuff. It worked, it made sense. And so, again, we recommended it to council, and council adopted it, and that forms the basis of how we budget in Geraldton now. And I know that when we go through our budget, and recently when we had a budget meeting with council, I have councillors referring back to the work and the criteria that the community panel have established and say, look, we can't do that, or we can't cut that because it's highly valued by the community as per the recommendations. We did have a couple of problems. We had some trying to get the community around range and level of service was really difficult. A lot of the times the community wanted to get into the discussion about how we do it. So you're using 3-ply toilet paper at the Civic Theatre. Perhaps you should be using 1-ply to cut costs. No, it's really about what services are we providing at our theatre. So that was a challenge. So at the end of the process, we had a 10-year capital works plan and a range and level of service recommendations that were adopted by the council, and I was very pleased and blown away by the process. Yes, it was very labour intensive, but we think we got some good results. Some of the challenge and lessons learned, the community are prepared and want to be involved. So when you think about the panel that we had for the range and level of services, these people gave up a full day every Saturday for 8 weeks, plus worked on this project during the week in their own time. So they really wanted to be involved. We had to manage staff anxiety because it's very difficult for one of our managers to get up and get grilled about what they do and why they do it. So we had some staff that were a little bit defensive, and we had to provide some support to them and some coaching for them in terms of how to handle difficult conversations and how to be resilient. We had some rogue panellists. We had, after one of our meetings, we had a panellist rock up at the library and demand information from our staff at the library because they were on this panel and they're going to cut the library costs in half and they'll be without a job. And as soon as we found that out, we called up the chairman of the Independent Review Committee, and they went and had a conversation with them about the role, the panellist role, and we worked through that. We had some very, very strong personalities on the panel. One of the principles was inclusion, so we had to make sure that we had all our demographics covered, and we all have loonies in our community, vocal loonies, so we had some on our panel too. We weren't deliberately picked, and the council's biggest adversary in the community was randomly selected by the demographer, and my director came in and said, "Oh, Ken, we've got a problem." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Oh, I won't say the name. Say it's Paul Smith." I hope there's no Paul Smiths here. "Paul Smith's been picked on the panel. What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, you've got to accept him because you can't not accept him because if you don't, you just lose, the whole process loses credibility. But we need to make sure that we manage him effectively so that he doesn't dominate everyone else." And he did. And again, our Independent Review Committee, their role was to pick up on that. And we had complaints from some other panellists and to have that constructive conversation about role, behaviour. And it was a difficulty keeping the panel focused on the what, not the how we fix roads, not whether we should fix roads, the service levels for our roads, but how we fix them. We shouldn't be using those shovels, we should be using those shovels. We should outsource instead of doing it in-house, but that wasn't their role. So we had a lot of that, but we allowed the community to talk about that, and that formed a separate part of the recommendation, which didn't require a council resolution. And it was very much time intensive, significant amount of time, and labour intensive. So every time we ran one of these sessions, we would have 12 of our staff being involved in it. One of our staff would be a table facilitator, and they're trained in facilitation. Then we had the backroom staff that were analysing the results as they're coming through, trying to find themes, questions, issues, source data. So it was very, very time intensive. So the lessons, continuing on the lessons learned, community is smarter than we think. We actually got a good breakdown of internal silos because when our facilitators were from all of our departments in the council, so by participating in the process, they got a greater understanding of what we do. And I think the staff benefited from the process just as much as the community. And it was a great professional development opportunity for them. Importantly, we had politically defendable outcomes. So when we adopted our budget and we said we've taken this position with regard to this service, or this is our capital works priorities next year, we could defend it based on the outcomes of the community panel. One of the things that surprised me is that coming into the workshops, we had a number of community panellists that were pretty aggressive about the council and had set views about council and what it did and what it didn't do. But when they left, they were all champions for the city. They were advocates and champions for our city. And I can remember one lady telling me that she was at a barbecue and talked, and she happened to overhear someone trash talking the council and how slack the council were, and the council don't do this. And she said, "I couldn't believe it because I'd just spent 8 weeks understanding what the council did. I got in there and defended the council, and I would never have done that." So you do get an informed community, informed panellists, and they become your champions. And we won a couple of awards, which I was particularly proud of. And so life was good. That was my first exercise. Good, got that out of the way. Won't have to do that for a while. And then it all started to go very, very interesting. We just finished, in in Queensland, though, asset management is something that's been around for quite a while, since the mid-90s. In Western Australia, I think local government's still trying to get used to the concept of asset management. It's only been in the last few years that assets have been recorded at fair value. And we thought we were we were leading the field, but I wasn't quite comfortable. And I came from a different level of asset management than what we had in our council. So I had my staff working on an exercise to review all our assets, to identify what we had and understand what condition they were in. So they came back and said, we've done it, and this is our asset renewal profile. And we only fund renewals. We only have about $13 million a year that we fund with renewals. And next year, we've got a backlog of around about $27 million. So that's $27 million worth of assets need to be fixed now. And in 10 years' time, we've got, on average, for 3 years, on average, over $40 million. So we're got a challenge. And our capacity to fund is around about that, to be able to get to that red line, which we think if we fill in the gaps and push things out, if that red line, we think we can achieve a reasonable funding scenario for renewing our assets. But it requires a significant reduction in our costs to free up cash to fund our renewals. So we'd already achieved through our other initiatives about $2 million in efficiency gains, but we need to find another $4 million, and we need to find it now. So it was a big concern. And the staff said, well, why not participatory budgeting? And my reaction was a little bit more pleasant that time, because I had a good experience from it, and I was confident that if we went to the community, explained our predicament, our circumstances, engaged them in a very, very real way, we might get an outcome that they could accept and that the council could accept. So we went through that process. We developed we called a community summit. We went through all of our budget again. This time we took a slightly different tack. We looked at our mandatory and non-mandatory services. So we cut up our budget into mandatory and non-mandatory on paper. And mandatory services are those things that you have to do by law, legislation, regulation, legal agreement. So we have to do that. So my role there is to drive efficiencies and savings in that. But the non-mandatory services are all those other things that you do, that you don't have to, but you do because you think they're of value to the community. And we needed, and as well as driving efficiencies on the mandatory services that we provide, we needed to cut. We actually needed to cut. And we broke down the budget. When we went back, we engaged all of the previous participants because we felt that they were informed to a certain extent, but we extended it. We used the demographer again to make sure we had a good balance. And we did something which was interesting, in that we let people self-nominate. And that was interesting because every loony that had an opinion on how the council could be run put up their hand and self-nominated. But we worked through that. We had an original information session, explained to people the process, questions, answers. Went for about 5 hours. And then we gave them all the data, all the information. And the way that we approached the second activity is we said, well, we have about $8 million of non-mandatory services. We need to get a sense of what the priority is. So we're going to give you this imaginary or virtual $6 million, and you've got the list of all the non-mandatory services and what we do, why we do it, what the costs, what the income and expense is and the net impact. And you need to choose which ones you're going to fund and which ones you're not going to fund. And that was their homework. And they came back and we gave them some software to do that, and I'll talk about that in just a little minute. We gave them the software for them to be able to do that. And then they came back for a full day and did the deliberative process. Looked at the individual results, looked at the group results of the 100 people that participated, analysed, and we gave people the opportunity to stand up on a soapbox and talk to issues that they were passionate about. And it could have been climate change, it could have been journal protection, it could have been culture or the arts. And so everyone had an opportunity to push what they they thought was critical or really important for a vibrant and attractive community. And that was a full day session. At the end of that, during that day, they could change their results online, and then at the end of the day, wrapped it up, and they had a couple of days to go back and consider the outcomes, and we gave them copies of the outcomes, and they could change their priorities again. And it was greatly assisted this time by the use of some software that one of my brighter staff members came up with. I don't like his marketing name, Partici Budget. So all of our participants were given a log on and ID, and they could go on and log on to our site. And on the site, we had all of our activities, all of the non-mandatory activities grouped under the pillars of our strategic community plan. If they moved their mouse over the description or the name of the activity, a description box would come up and give them an explanation as to what the activity is about. It told them what the cost was, what the income, the expense, and they had to make a choice. Yes, I will include this, or no, I won't include this. With the $6 million I've got, I will spend money on this, or I won't spend the money on that. Now, we knew a lot of people would go, well, yeah, look, you need to cut 10% off, so I'll just wipe 10% off everything. And so we only didn't give them that choice. They had to choose the whole apples, because it's about the service we provide. And we felt, well, we didn't know what 10% less would be, but we knew people would say, look, I've got some ideas about how you can cut costs here. So we put in a comments field so they could put their comments in about any suggestions they had on that service. As they spent their money, this little box was on the lower bottom right-hand corner of their screen. It told them how much funds they had available. They could walk away from it, log back in another day and complete it if they haven't done it. So I think they had a week or 2 weeks to go through this process. We had helplines, we had hotlines, we had staff available. So if they weren't quite sure, well, what does this artist residence program about? They could ring up our hotline and get someone to talk to them about what that actually means. And at the end of it, they were able to print out what they allocated their $6 million to, and they could also see what the whole group was. Well, they couldn't see what the whole group was until after we closed off and we did the workshop, so they could only see what their individual results. This is a sample of a report that came out of the system. It's the area that's, the first column is the pillar of our strategic community plan, the service, how many votes, what percentage of votes, what the net impact is. In bracket means we make money, and surprise, surprise, the parking operations said, we'll keep that. Because they figured if they included an activity that actually made money, instead of having $6 million, if the activity actually generated $200,000 revenue, instead of having $6 million, they'd have $6.2 million. So most of the stuff that had money in it was accepted. And the cumulative total, because we're working down to $6 million. So that's now formed part of our budget process. We're actually reviewing those results at the moment. It was a pretty crash course in participatory budgeting this exercise, because it wasn't as intensive. So we weren't able to give the community as much information, or the community didn't have as much time as the 8-week process to delve into what we do and why we do it. So the outcomes, we've got a priority list of non-mandatory activities. We've got clear direction on what services to cut, and that's being considered by the council. We have a better informed community and a better informed council. So my personal learnings, don't be afraid to ask questions you don't know the answer to. I no longer subscribe to the Perry Mason motto or the P.T. Barnum motto. The community's collective wisdom is actually a lot greater than you think, and deliberative democracy is a great way to get community champions for the council. And we talk about community engagement, but when you go through this process, you are clearly demonstrating that you're committed to engaging with the community in a very real way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's fantastic to hear a tried and tested and then try to test it again approach. I met a guy in 2008 in London, and I wonder whether he's an important part of the community. And I'm interested if you know the name of Andrew Outhwaite.
Yes, I do.
Can I just ask, how important is it to have someone like him in the community, enabling and building capacity, entering into something like this, so that the community's got some sense of how collaboration can work?
Yeah, so the gentleman he's talking about, his name is Andrew Outhwaite, who runs Pollinators, which is a social enterprise and an engagement organisation. It's a social organisation. It's not really a not-for-profit. Really, really important. But interestingly, he wasn't involved in the deliberative process, because we went through the random selection. And the way we did the selection process is, the first time we did it with a combination of telephone, but someone made a really interesting comment. We're finding that we couldn't get the people that we wanted, because we got a lot of old people because they had home phones, but we couldn't get the younger generation. So then we did door knocking and engagement with schools. But people like Andrew are very, very important in our community.
Hi, Ken. Loads of questions, but I'll try and keep them brief. How did you select the independent panel? What was the synergy between the CapEx panel and the service level panel in themselves? Was there much communication between the two? And I suppose I'm wondering where the renewal budget sat within those deliberations. And if you were to do the first iteration again, would you add the costings that you had in the second iteration to the service levels panel?
Yeah, okay, there's a lot of questions there. I'll try and it's the independent review committee. We looked at who we thought was respected and credible in the community, and we handpicked them, to be honest. The renewal budget, we didn't let them look at the renewal budget, because the renewal budget, the principles of renewal are based on the principles of asset management, and so we didn't let them touch the renewals budget, because we need to make that choice when we renew and if we renew. So we didn't, but we let them look at all the new stuff. The engagement between the two panels, there was no engagement. They didn't run simultaneously. They ran one after the other, simply because we wouldn't have had the resources to try and run two panels at the same time. So there was no engagement between the two. If we run it again, we would certainly give the panels the results of the previous work. And the last exercise that we did, we gave them the outcomes of the previous community engagement. I think when I went to the council and said, look, we want to go and do participatory budgeting, I was looking at the body language, and a couple of councillors went, not this again. And they said, how many times are we going to do this? We said, well, this is a different circumstance. We're in the circumstance now where you have to cut. You have to cut money out of your budget. And I've squeezed this rock as hard as I can. I can't get any more blood out of this stone. We've delivered $2 million in efficiencies, and we'll continue to work efficiencies. But we're at the point now, if you want to reduce rate increases, you've got to cut services. And so if you're going to do that, what better way to do it than engage the community and ask what services to be cut? And then the result is, we're looking at 7.6% 2 years ago, and we're down to 3.9% per annum for the next 10 years.
Hi, Ken. Thank you. That was very interesting. Can I ask, did you lose many participants over the process? And do you think that that there is a proportion that attended because you paid them, and does that necessarily matter?
Yeah, that's good. Very good question. The first sessions, the community panels that we did for Capital Works and Range Level Service, we paid them $100 a day. The second one, we thought, well, we don't think it's very wise going to the community and saying, we want you to tell us how we can cut money out of our budget, or by cut range and services, and we're going to pay you $100 a day. So we engaged with some of the local businesses, and they sponsored, and so we had Apple iPods and iPads and beauty products and those sorts of things. We had a lower, even though people were getting paid, we had a higher dropout rate in the first session than the ones where they weren't getting paid. And I think what really struck, because I think they just kind of expected to waltz in and go, yeah, do this, do that, it's all be sweet. But it was really intensive. And we found some people found it very, very difficult to cope with the workload that they had.
Okay, can we please thank Ken Diehm.